But I guess interestingly enough, kind of coming out of like the visit to Athens and stuff, and like you said, like a very kind of biblically important place. So as part of my kind of travels, was able to kind of see what we know is from kind of Act 17, Mars Hill, the Areopagus, which is basically like so the Acropolis is more so like a marketplace, but the Areopagus, interestingly enough, the lady was saying to us now, is where kind of Greek men take Greek women now on their first dates. So it's interesting to see it. Yeah, so it's still got the historical significance, but it has a different contemporary, I guess, significance. But historically, at least anyway, it's the place where kind of the debaters, the spokes, and men only at that time used to go, and kind of like the marketplace of ideas, and they used to kind of share insights and just kind of discuss and reason. And was able to kind of go see that from the Acropolis. And funnily enough, it reminded me of a tweet that I had seen not too long ago, a couple of weeks ago. And basically this guy was basically saying, if Paul was still alive today, he would write a letter to Lagosians. And I don't know if any of you guys had seen that tweet. Have you guys seen the tweet?
I saw the tweet.
The
comments killed me.
All I remember is this old foolish Lagosians.
Oh, ye foolish Lagosians.
That killed me.
This is the third time.
I'm writing again.
Next time I'm coming.
Honestly, one of the funniest tweets that I've seen in a long time. And it was just like, do you know what? Now that I've been to this city and I've kind of had a chance to kind of think through his address to the people of Athens at the time, it just got me thinking like, what would, and I guess in the same way that the person who wrote the tweet was kind of thinking about, what would kind of Paul write to people in my city? What would be the things that maybe kind of characterize London, or if you're in Lagos or wherever you are and you're listening to us, probably a helpful exercise to kind of think through maybe kind of what are I don't know if it's the issues that the churches here are facing, what kind of encouragements might the Apostle Paul or just Peter or anybody who was inspired to write scripture, what might they be saying to us to encourage us in our walk here? And I think that was one of the things that we were thinking about. How about we just, what are the things that we look at in London maybe and in our time and think would be just helpful to encourage Christians about, or what might the scriptures kind of speak to more pertinently about what we kind of see day to day out here?
That's a good question. I've been thinking a lot about like just churchianity. And
Say it again. What's the word?
Churchianity.
Okay, this is a new word. Break it down.
You've heard churchianity?
Churchianity.
I
have never heard.
It was
this
actually
term.
It was actually. I was watching Love Is Blind. I don't know if any of you guys have seen Love Is Blind in this season.
What's Love Is Blind?
So it's a show on Netflix where kind of the premise of the show is to prove that if you can kind of fall in love with someone without actually meeting them, so they kind of take. So they take like men and women, put them in different pods, kind of speed dating essentially, and then after a while, a man will kind of propose to a woman, and then she agrees, and then they get
having
engaged.
never seen the person.
Yeah, and you see people say stuff like, "I love you, you're the one for me," and then so they accept the proposal, and then they have like a big reveal, so hug one another, and then they plan their marriage, which they get married in like 4 to 6 weeks. So yes. Random, but there was a couple on there.
Sorry,
have you not seen this?
I've never seen this. I don't even.
Season 2 as well.
What is? Can you speak to the success rate from season 1?
Okay, so there was like a big couple, Cameron and Lauren. I'm really showing you tea. But they were interracial, and they're like still married, still happily in love. They were almost like the breakout couple of season 1.
Right. Okay.
I think maybe there's usually 6 couples. I may be wrong. I think maybe 3 are still married.
Okay.
And then they do this thing where there's like a decision. So you kind of meet each other at the altar and you say, "Do you agree to marry this person?" And that's kind of I don't want to marry you. Or I do want to marry you. So the people I think some people decided not to actually marry. So those who did get married, I think are still married. But the Cameron and Lauren one, like they literally said, "I love you," like after the first or second day, hadn't seen each other, nothing.
How long ago was this shot for us to have a sense of how long the marriage is?
I'm not sure. So season 1 came out maybe before pandemic, so it's been like 3 years now. So in season 2,
sorry, go on.
There's a woman. She's a professing Christian, and she meets a guy, and he's an atheist. So so they have great rapport.
Right. And
then she says something like, "I don't know, do you believe in God?" He's like, "Who's that? Don't believe in fairy dust." The usual big bang. So she's very much like, but if we have kids, would you let them come to church with me? And he was like, "I don't want to brainwash my children." And it is back and forth. And for me, you just saw that she was very conversant in churchianity. She just wanted, I think she was almost repelled by how vehement he was against God.
Okay.
So and then it just had me thinking that in our day and age where a lot of people kind of can speak the lingo of they know this, they might know the praise songs, they might know some scriptures, they might know how to blend in, but they actually don't actually have genuine faith. And I see that kind of in our era a lot more in comparison to our parents. Of course, a lot of our parents weren't Christians and pretended to for a long time.
Right.
But you see it in our day and age where we can kind of blend in and out. And I wonder if that would be, I don't know, rebuke to us that, our faith, is our faith genuine, or have we kind of just blended in with the in crowd for the moment or the time being?
Do you think that's a particularly pertinent issue in London? Is that something you feel like you see quite a lot?
I think maybe along millennials as well. So so your parents have come over here, they've raised you in the faith. So you still have the like remnants of it. You're just not really kind of down for it generally, but you can still kind of move in and out.
Right.
That was just something I was thinking about. What about you, Ejim?
Yeah.
Churchianity. I don't think
Yeah, I've never heard
term.
Churchianity, really?
I almost thought you meant like people who think that going to church in itself.
I think that's another
Is that part of it?
spin-off as well. So you're thinking you're a Christian just because you go to church.
Right.
But you might know some people that go to church.
Yeah.
A lot, or once a month, or when it's Easter or Christmas, but that's too much for me. And maybe that's just their pool of like morality that they're still kind of holding on to. Like, no, I'm not relaxed, man. I still go to church. But no, that was just something I had in mind. What's Paul writing to you?
I don't know. So I'm thinking again, London. And in many ways, you look through the letters and like similar themes come up. So in a sense, like, you can see how Paul probably saying the same things in many ways. But there are obviously some things that are not as clear. Bible still speak to them, but in terms of how sins have manifested in the modern culture,
Right.
Because Paul, speaking sometimes specifically to some sinful practices unique to the culture of the day.
So for example, you can think of like Corinthians and sexual morality.
Exactly. There's particular
the Master reforms.
Exactly. And referring to even just cultural norms, when not even maybe just in a particular sin, to make a point. You probably have to make the point differently, use another cultural norm to display the point, whether it's gender roles or whether So I think in many ways he was saying the same things. But it's interesting because I think I'm interested in terms of thinking of where we're at now in society, particularly in the UK context. What has sort of filled the news over recent months?
Okay.
In terms of what we expect from those in sort of position of leadership.
Right.
And for me, it really just reminds me that people have the law of God on their hearts. Sometimes we forget because the world is crazy and people are doing some mad stuff.
Crazy.
But there's points in time where there's a collective fury.
Right.
And a justified fury over the behaviour of one or few.
So tell us how you really feel about Boris Johnson.
No, but those parties,
I don't know what you're talking about.
Those parties were really like how.
But they're reassuring to me that human beings, actually, you know what right and wrong is.
Yeah.
We're selective, but
I don't know if you saw the most recent dressing down John Burko gave.
He's ridiculous. He's actually ridiculous. The articulation is ridiculous. Then he was like, "That's just some of the things I think."
Yeah. Ask me later and I'll tell you how I really feel.
So it's the hypocrisy. It's the hypocrisy that I think.
I think I was gonna say that.
Do you know what I mean?
I think hypocrisy.
Right. I think you see it in society. Like there's certain things we're willing to, and similar to maybe something we'll discuss later. There's certain things that particularly push the button of the society as a whole, and justifiably. But there's other things which you could argue are worse in terms of indicators of where our moral compass is.
Right.
That society has come to accept as a norm in our day-to-day living. You almost never know, how people would react to the things, and when we're so careful when we're talking to things with people at work, etc., because we're not sure how they perceive, what their sort of subjective morality is, and it's and because that's the norm and the way we interact, it can be quite like sad and depressing because, you know, look how far society has fallen from the truth. And you can imagine maybe something that's a theme Paul might reflect on, you know, when we think we're justified in our anger, our hypocrisy shows the more at that moment, you know.
So I think I was just going to ask you, I guess, on that point about governance and, you know, thinking through, because I'm still not quite sure where I'm landing on this. Not necessarily that I'm now going to be encouraging revolt, but more so in this point where we're kind of seeing a collective frustration with government and leadership. How do we express that in a way that demonstrates our submission to the authorities, but still kind of recognizes the collective failure of what I consider collective failure of the parties in charge? So has that something that you've been thinking about, and what do you think is a kind of an appropriate response to that?
I'm always encouraged because I know that the early church, they faced, in terms of political opposition, they faced something that I might probably never face in my lifetime, and yet still, you know, God kept them and they were steadfast, you know. And we're encouraged by letters written in that context, right? You know, so in many ways, our context is much easier. So
when you're saying that, sorry, do you mean actual
like we're
political persecution?
Yeah, we're thinking, we're thinking Nero, we're thinking rulers at the time who were persecuting Christians directly. Right. Obviously, we're not really receiving that, but yet still, I think we can speak to the wrong that those in power do, because it's wrong. And I think then the Christian has to find the balance of being able to do that and still honor those God has put in, because we see the early church do that. Right. Paul Clay outlines the role and position rulers have and responsibility they have, yet still we know in later letters, I know Paul's thinking Peter about living peaceably, and what we know of the time they lived in, the narrative wasn't to revolt, you know. So yeah, I think it's a really high threshold to start talking about revolt, right? For me as a Christian, because I, you know, it's not clear that that's what we're here to do. Yet still, that isn't to say that we don't recognize where leaders are doing wrong, because there is a standard, and that's in the Bible.
It's tough because I don't know. I've been thinking about this point just in terms of like what is even the appropriate like kind of respect or reverence for them, because it's like increasingly I feel like over the years I've become apolitical as I've become more and more disenchanted with like who's in power and kind of who the opposition are. But obviously the scriptures kind of tell for us to like pray for our leaders and stuff like that. Yeah. But then even just on a day-to-day practicality, I find it a struggle genuinely. And you probably find this more generally, not just with your leaders, maybe people you don't always kind of see eye to eye with, right? Yeah. Some people you might consider your quote unquote enemies, to kind of pray for them and show love towards them. And I think that's one of the kind of more practical challenges that I've been finding, that actually as more and more gets revealed about, you know, I was just going to use a word that is completely unnecessary, but machinations of this government, like it's just like you become more and more frustrated at, you know, what they present, but actually the very bad underbelly of the current government, and then it makes me more and more reluctant, practically, to kind of think of, I don't know, to respect them absolutely, but to almost even kind of think of them in a positive light, that they've been placed here for our good. Because it's like, actually, I look around me and I just kind of see the welfare of so many more people seems to be regressing. How can I appropriately reflect this in my prayers concerning the current leadership we have right now? So that's been a challenge. It hasn't, and I think to your point, it hasn't led me to a point where I don't pray for leadership. So I feel like almost like more to the point now, I'm quite more seriously taking into consideration the conversion of souls of people in Parliament, the promulgation of Christian voices in there, to really kind of just challenge, you know, I think you've called it, challenge the hypocrisy, challenge, you know, the blatant lying and stuff like that, like to really stand for integrity in places of leadership. And so that's kind of where it's kind of pushed me to. But it's been hard because I know that there are kind of, this is a conversation I guess we're having on a pod, but I could so easily descend into just becoming like abusive and completely dismissive of who God has placed in charge of us.
Babylon now.
Yeah, but it's there on the tip of your tongue. It's so easy,
especially for someone like Boris Johnson.
Yeah, it's very easy to be in conversation. To be in conversation with your colleagues, with your friends who may not be believers, to just like immediately, do you know what? I have these completely fundamentally different ideals to this person. I hate even. I don't know if I can call it a right to say, but I hate the way in which this country is being led. I hate the way in which people are being fed lies and all of that kind of stuff. But it not to kind of descend into like a dishonoring of that position, because even if the person who's in power isn't necessarily somebody we can consider godly or whatever, I think there is still a sense in which the position itself holds weight in the Christian's mind, and so you can't just kind of there's a like a baseline, I guess, of respect that you have to be able to give to that. Mary, I wanted to come back to you on what you kind of thought was the antidote to churchianity. I don't know if you've been thinking about that also. It's just like, how do you think we can kind of speak to more broadly people who have been... So I think maybe I'd kind of thought of it as like, you've been churched. Do you know what I mean? Like, so I've heard that term in the sense like you've been raised in the church, like you say, like the lingo and all that kind of stuff. If you get around people, you can make your way through a service without ever really kind of going beyond like the surface type thing. What do you kind of think is the antidote to that? And even when you're kind of thinking about our city, maybe more specifically, how can we encourage people to get out of the churchianity culture and just into genuinely embracing like the faith, if that makes sense?
I think you kind of have to pray really for like just the Spirit to kind of take over. That sounds very extreme. But,
no, hey.
Because I think even in churchianity or being church, there's a forming of your own morality. So like even when you see someone and say, "Oh, this is what I believe," or "I don't go to church," and I've already formed my own sense of morality, and everyone is trying to be a good person, quote unquote. But of course, the gospel promotes the belief or the truth that we have no righteousness of our own.
Right.
Our righteousness is in Christ. So you really just have to pray, because even our family members in there, regular church attendees, but they really have no devotion to the Lord. And it's hard to. You might say to someone who doesn't go to church, "Oh, you should start going to church, start reading your Bible." But it's difficult when you're speaking to people and they're doing that already. And of course, you can challenge on certain things. Really wanting to pinpoint kind of what your righteousness is in. Is it in yourself or is it in Christ? What's your life like? Is it evidenced by obedience? But it comes to a point where you just have to pray that the Lord will remove scales and really kind of get to the heart in people's lives. Because it's just interesting. I've just been thinking about that. Like even when sometimes I'm on Twitter and you might see something controversial and someone's taking one side and someone's taking another side, and everyone is really trying to ascribe their own sense of morality to that situation. Right. Doesn't matter what the topic is. It could be about even like, for example, the Super Bowl. Dr. Dre there. I don't know if you guys saw it, and there's some people discussing kind of Dr. Dre's historic history with domestic violence and abuse to women, and you've got whatever side you stand on, you've got some people saying like he shouldn't actually be performing, given
that platform.
Yeah, it shouldn't be. Okay. Some people are saying no, he should be, and through the veil of that discussion, you're seeing people really talking about morality. What is our sense of morality? What is our sense of good and evil? And for the Christian, it's easy to buy into that, but we have to remember that we have no morality that we can stand on outside of Christ. And it's really just reminding yourself of that, isn't it?
Yeah.